I'm Byron, 28, and 3 months ago I was just another guy running a small independent bookstore in downtown Portland, thinking my biggest life decision was whether to order more poetry collections or business books for the fall display. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Because one rainy Thursday afternoon I joked to a customer, "If you were 35, I'd propose." She laughed, this rich, genuine laugh that filled my entire store, and said, "I'm 51. Is that a deal breaker?" From that moment, everything I thought I knew about love, courage, and taking chances got turned completely upside down. This is the story of how a stupid joke became the most important conversation of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My bookstore, Chapter and Verse, sits wedged between a vintage record shop and a coffee roastery on Southeast Morrison Street. It's the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else's coffee order, where people still believe in supporting local businesses, and where a 28-year-old guy can actually make a living selling physical books in 2024. The store has been my life for the past 4 years, ever since I inherited it from my great-aunt Rosemary, along with her ancient cash register, her collection of first-edition mystery novels, and her stubborn belief that bookstores are sacred spaces where magic can happen. Portland in October is a study in contradictions. The leaves are turning brilliant orange and red, but the rain never stops. The tourists have mostly gone home, leaving the city to those of us who genuinely love the gray skies and the way the mist makes everything look like a watercolor painting. It's cozy season, the time when people start buying more books, lighting candles, and spending longer hours browsing in warm, quiet places. For a bookstore owner, it should have been my favorite time of year. Should have been, because I was stuck. Not financially. The store was doing well enough. Not professionally. I loved what I did. I was stuck emotionally, romantically, in that particular way that happens when you're approaching 30 and realize that all your friends are getting married, buying houses, having kids, and you're still waiting. Waiting for what? I couldn't exactly say. The right person, maybe. The right moment. The courage to actually take a real risk instead of hiding behind book recommendations and comfortable small talk. My social circle in Portland was tight, but predictable. There was Julie, my best friend since college, who worked as a graphic designer and had the kind of blunt honesty that could cut through any excuse I tried to make about my love life. She'd been pushing me to join dating apps, go to more social events, put myself out there, phrases that made me want to hide deeper in my bookstore. Then there was Austin, my neighbor who ran the record shop next door, a guy whose idea of relationship advice usually involved craft beer and stories about his own spectacularly failed romantic attempts. And Bradley, my college roommate who'd moved to Portland 6 months ago and was still adjusting to Pacific Northwest life while working as a freelance photographer. These 3 had become my unofficial relationship advisory board, whether I wanted one or not. They meant well, but their advice ranged from Julie's aggressive optimism to Austin's cynical humor to Bradley's tendency to overthink everything until it became paralyzingly complicated. What they all agreed on was that I was playing it too safe, that at 28 I should be taking more chances, meeting more people, living more boldly. Easy for them to say. None of them had to face the daily reminder that they were still single every time a couple walked into the store holding hands, while browsing the travel section, planning their next adventure together. The truth was, I'd been hurt before. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make for an interesting story, but in that quiet, persistent way that makes you question your own judgment. A 2-year relationship with someone who'd seemed perfect on paper but who'd gradually made me feel like I was never quite enough. Not ambitious enough, not social enough, not interesting enough. When it ended, I'd retreated into the bookstore, into the safe world of fictional characters and other people's love stories, telling myself I was just taking time to figure things out. But 4 years is a long time to figure things out. And lately, the bookstore had started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a hiding place. I was becoming the guy who knew every regular customer's reading preferences, but couldn't remember the last time I'd had a real conversation with someone who wasn't buying something from me. The guy who could recommend the perfect novel for any mood, but couldn't work up the courage to ask someone out for coffee. Portland's literary scene was thriving, full of author readings, book clubs, and literary events, where I should have been meeting like-minded people. Instead, I'd become a master of the professional smile, the knowledgeable recommendation, the friendly but ultimately surface-level interaction. I was successful, respected in my small corner of the book world, and completely alone in any way that mattered. The neighborhood itself seemed to mock my isolation. Everywhere I looked, there were couples, sharing scones at the coffee shop, browsing vinyl records together, walking their dogs in the morning mist. Even my store seemed designed for romantic encounters, with its cozy reading nooks, soft lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that practically begged for meet-cute moments. Other people's meet-cute moments, apparently, never mine. That's the world I was living in when Sophia walked into my store that rainy Thursday afternoon, when my offhand joke about proposing to a 35-year-old turned into a conversation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about possibility, about age, about what it means to be brave enough to want something real. I was a guy who'd spent 4 years playing it safe, surrounded by stories of other people's adventures, about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected plot twist is the one that finally makes your own story worth telling. Growing up in Salem, Oregon, I was the kid who always had his nose buried in a book while other kids were playing sports or getting into trouble. My parents, a high school English teacher and a librarian, thought this was perfectly normal, even admirable. They encouraged my reading habits, took me to every bookstore within a 50-mile radius, and probably never imagined that their shy, bookish son would grow up to be a shy, bookish adult, still hiding behind the same literary walls they'd helped him build. The inheritance of chapter and verse from great-aunt Rosemary wasn't entirely unexpected. She'd been the family's resident eccentric, the woman who'd never married, traveled the world with just a backpack and fierce independence, and somehow managed to build a successful business in one of the most challenging industries imaginable. When I was 12, she told me, "Byron, someday this store will need someone who understands that books aren't just products, they're doorways. Make sure you're brave enough to walk through them yourself before you start selling them to others." At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic. Aunt Rosemary had a flair for the theatrical, a way of making everything sound like it came from the pages of one of her beloved mystery novels. But now at 28, I was beginning to understand what she'd meant. I'd become incredibly good at helping other people find the doorways they needed, the perfect romance for someone nursing a broken heart, the inspiring memoir for someone stuck in a career transition, the fantasy series for someone escaping a difficult family situation. But when it came to walking through doorways myself, I was still standing in the same spot where she'd left me. My daily routine had become as predictable as a sonnet. Up at 6:30, coffee from the roastery next door, unlock the store by 9 xiao, spend the morning processing new inventory and updating the website. Lunch was usually a sandwich eaten while reading in the back office. Afternoons were for customer service and special orders. Evenings for organizing author events and book clubs. Close at 8 cows, walk home to my studio apartment 6 blocks away, dinner for 1 while watching Netflix, read until I fell asleep, repeat. It wasn't a bad life. Actually, by most objective measures, it was a pretty good life. I was self-employed, doing work I genuinely loved, in a city that appreciated independent businesses. I had health insurance, a modest but growing savings account, and the respect of my customers and peers. The Portland Independent Booksellers Association had featured chapter and verse in their newsletter twice in the past year. I was succeeding at something that mattered. So why did I feel like I was slowly disappearing? The answer, if I was being honest with myself, had everything to do with connection. Real connection, not the pleasant but ultimately superficial interactions I had with customers and fellow business owners. I was surrounded by people all day long, but I went to bed every night feeling fundamentally alone. It was like being constantly thirsty while standing next to a river. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The solution was right there, but I couldn't figure out how to reach for it. Dating in your late 20s in Portland should have been easy. The city was full of creative, intelligent, environmentally conscious people who valued the same things I did. There were hiking groups and book clubs, craft brewery tours, and Saturday market meetups, volunteer opportunities, and community gardens. Every week, Julie would send me links to events where I could meet someone special. Every week, I'd find an excuse not to go. The truth was messier than simple shyness. I'd tried the dating apps, suffered through awkward coffee meetings with women who were perfectly nice, but felt like strangers reading from a script. I'd joined a hiking group that Austin recommended, only to discover that I was apparently the only person there who wasn't already coupled up and comparing notes about their relationships. I'd even let Bradley drag me to photography walks around the city. Events that were supposed to be social but mostly involved standing around looking at the same bridges and food trucks everyone had photographed 1,000 times before. Each failed attempt had reinforced the same uncomfortable conclusion. I was better at observing life than living it. I could curate the perfect reading experience for someone else, but I couldn't figure out how to write my own story. I could recommend books about adventure, passion, and taking risks, but when it came to my own life, I was stuck in the prologue. The bookstore itself had become both my strength and my limitation. It gave me purpose, financial independence, and a respected place in the community. But it also provided the perfect excuse to avoid pushing beyond my comfort zone. Why go to social events when I had author readings to organize? Why try new dating approaches when I was busy helping other people find their perfect books? Why take emotional risks when I could live vicariously through the fictional characters I spent my days recommending? My apartment reflected this same pattern: comfortable, functional, but utterly lacking in the kind of personal touches that suggested someone who was actively building a life rather than just maintaining one. I had thousands of books, a decent sound system, a coffee maker that Austin had picked out for me, and furniture that was presentable but forgettable. It was the home of someone who was waiting for real life to begin, not someone who was actively living it. Friends and family had started asking the inevitable questions. When was I going to settle down? Didn't I want kids? Wasn't I lonely rattling around that apartment by myself? The questions came from a place of love, but they highlighted the growing gap between where I was and where everyone assumed I should be. At 28, I was supposed to have answers, plans, at least some idea of what I wanted my future to look like. Instead, I felt like I was caught between two versions of myself: the confident, knowledgeable bookstore owner who could help anyone find exactly what they were looking for, and the uncertain, isolated guy who couldn't figure out what he was looking for himself. It was getting harder to reconcile those two people, harder to pretend that professional success was enough to fill all the empty spaces in my personal life. That's who I was when Sophia walked into Chapter and Verse that Thursday afternoon. A man who'd built a comfortable life around helping other people find their stories, while somehow forgetting to write his own. Julie Martinez had been my best friend since our sophomore year at University of Oregon, when we'd been paired together for a particularly brutal Victorian literature seminar that required weekly presentations on novels nobody actually wanted to read. While I'd stressed over every comma in my analysis of Middlemarch, Julie had somehow managed to make George Eliot sound like she was writing contemporary dating advice. "Look, Byron," she'd said after our presentation on marriage dynamics, "Dorothea's problem wasn't that she married the wrong guy. It's that she was so busy trying to be perfect that she forgot to figure out what she actually wanted." 15 years later, Julie was still giving me the same advice, just with more colorful language and less Victorian context. Now 29, Julie worked as a freelance graphic designer, specializing in book covers and promotional materials for small publishers. She'd moved to Portland 2 years after I did, claiming it was for the creative opportunities, but I suspected it was partly to keep an eye on me. Her studio apartment in the Alberta Arts District was everything mine wasn't. Bold colors, eclectic furniture, walls covered with her own artwork, and promotional posters for events she'd actually attended rather than just heard about. Julie had the kind of blunt honesty that could be either deeply comforting or absolutely terrifying, depending on whether you were ready to hear the truth. She'd been married briefly in her mid-20s to a guy named Marcus, who'd turned out to be more interested in the idea of having a creative wife than in actually supporting her creativity. The divorce had been swift and decisive, and Julie had emerged from it with a clearer sense of what she wanted, and zero patience for people who weren't willing to go after it. "Byron," she'd tell me at least once a month, usually while we were sharing a pitcher of beer at one of Portland's many brewery tap rooms, "you're like a librarian who's never checked out a book. You know everything about stories, but you're not living one." She'd started a campaign to get me more socially active that included everything from signing me up for online dating profiles, without my permission, to physically dragging me to art, gallery openings where she insisted I'd meet interesting people. Her latest strategy involved what she called strategic social exposure, a systematic plan to get me out of the bookstore and into situations where I might actually meet someone. She'd mapped out a rotating schedule of events. First Fridays, art walks, weekend farmers market visits, volunteer opportunities at the local literacy center, even a book club that met at a wine bar instead of someone's living room. Most of these plans died when they encountered my talent for finding excuses, but Julie's persistence was legendary. Austin Williams ran Vinyl Virtue, the record shop next to my bookstore, and had become my closest day-to-day friend through the simple proximity of shared business ownership and mutual coffee breaks. At 31, he'd been through enough romantic disasters to stock his own advice column, though his counsel typically came with a heavy dose of dark humor and craft beer. Austin had grown up in Portland, left for college in California, and returned 5 years ago to take over the record shop from his uncle. He'd brought back a girlfriend from San Francisco, a relationship that had imploded spectacularly when she'd realized that running a vinyl record store in Portland was not, in fact, a stepping stone to music industry fame and fortune. Since then, Austin had adopted a philosophy of romantic pessimism that he wore like armor. "The thing about dating in this city," Austin would say while we shared morning coffee in the narrow alley between our shops, "is that everyone's either trying to be someone they're not, or they're so committed to being themselves that they've forgotten how to compromise." He'd dated a parade of Portland women over the past few years, a food blogger who'd expected him to become a foodie, a yoga instructor who'd wanted to realign his chakras, a sustainable fashion designer who'd tried to overhaul his entire wardrobe. Despite his cynicism, Austin was actually a romantic at heart, which made his advice both helpful and dangerous. He'd encourage me to take risks while simultaneously warning me about all the ways those risks could backfire. "You should definitely ask her out," he'd say about whatever woman I'd mentioned, "but don't expect it to lead anywhere, because it probably won't. But if you don't try, you'll definitely regret it." His record shop reflected his personality. Carefully curated, slightly nostalgic, and full of hidden gems that most people missed on their first visit. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of music history and an uncanny ability to recommend the perfect album for any mood. But he'd given up trying to share his passion with romantic partners after too many relationships had foundered on his refusal to pretend he didn't care deeply about things other people considered trivial. Bradley Kim had been my college roommate and remained one of my closest friends despite, or maybe because of, our completely different approaches to life's challenges. Where I tended to avoid difficult decisions by staying busy with safe activities, Bradley approached every choice like it was a chess problem that required analyzing 17 different possible outcomes before making a move. He'd moved to Portland 6 months ago after ending a long-distance relationship with someone in Seattle and deciding he needed a creative reset. As a freelance photographer specializing in environmental and urban landscapes, he'd been drawn to Portland's combination of natural beauty and quirky cityscape. His Instagram account was filled with perfectly composed shots of Oregon's waterfalls, bridges, and coffee shops. But he spent so much time planning and analyzing each photo that he sometimes missed the spontaneous moments that made the best pictures. Bradley's apartment in the Pearl District was organized with military precision, camera equipment sorted by function, editing software constantly updated, a color-coded calendar system that tracked his projects, social commitments, and personal goals. He approached dating with the same methodical intensity, creating detailed profiles on multiple apps, researching potential matches like he was preparing for a job interview, and planning first dates with the kind of attention to detail usually reserved for wedding photography. The problem was that all this planning left him paralyzed when things didn't go according to script. He'd spend hours crafting the perfect opening message on a dating app, only to abandon the conversation when the woman responded with something unexpected. He'd plan elaborate first dates that fell apart the moment his date suggested doing something different. "I think I'm overthinking this," Bradley would say, which was his equivalent of other people saying, "I think I'm breathing." He'd analyze every interaction, every text message, every facial expression, until he'd convinced himself that he'd either misread the situation entirely or scared away yet another potential partner with his intensity. Despite his tendency toward analysis paralysis, Bradley was incredibly loyal and surprisingly insightful about other people's relationships. He could see patterns and possibilities that the people actually living them missed, and his advice, when he finally offered it, was usually thoughtful and practical. He just couldn't seem to apply the same clarity to his own romantic life. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday when my entire world shifted, though I didn't know it at the time. The rain had been falling steadily since morning, the kind of gentle Portland drizzle that keeps the tourists away, but makes the locals feel smugly superior about our weather tolerance. I was behind the counter, updating inventory on my laptop and half listening to the jazz playlist Austin had recommended, when the door chimes announced another customer. I looked up and saw her silhouette against the gray afternoon light, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked hair that caught the warm glow of the bookstore's Edison bulb fixtures. She was wearing a deep burgundy coat that looked expensive but not pretentious, and she moved through the space with the kind of confidence that suggested she belonged wherever she happened to be standing. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the counter with a smile that immediately made me forget whatever I'd been typing. "I'm looking for something specific, but I'm not sure it exists." Her voice had a slight rasp to it, the kind that suggested either a lifetime of interesting conversations or too many late nights, and I found myself leaning forward slightly to catch every word. "That's what we specialize in here," I replied, closing my laptop. "The impossible to find and the might not exist but should." She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to fill all the quiet corners of the store. "Perfect. I'm looking for a book about second chances that doesn't treat them like consolation prizes. Something that acknowledges that sometimes the best things in life come when you're not expecting them, when you've stopped trying to force the universe to follow your timeline." I blinked, caught off guard by the specificity of her request. Most customers asked for something good, or whatever you recommend. This was different. Personal, thoughtful, like she'd been carrying this exact question around for weeks. "That's very specific," I said, coming around the counter. "Are we talking fiction or non-fiction? Memoir? Self-help that doesn't actually feel like self-help?" "Fiction, I think. Something with characters who feel real, who make mistakes that matter. I'm tired of books where everyone's either perfectly wise or completely clueless. Real people are messier than that." As we walked toward the literary fiction section, I found myself studying her profile, trying to guess her age. She could have been anywhere from 40 to 60. One of those women who'd clearly never seen any reason to apologize for taking up space in the world. There was something magnetic about her presence, the way she moved through the narrow aisles like she was completely comfortable in her own skin. "I'm Sophia, by the way," she said, running her fingers along the book spines. "Sophia Winters. I just moved to Portland from Seattle, still figuring out the neighborhood dynamics." "Byron," I replied. "Byron Fletcher. And welcome to the weirdest, most wonderful city in the Pacific Northwest. What brought you here?" She paused, her hand resting on a copy of The Invisible Bridge. Career change, life change. The kind of major upheaval that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. She turned to face me, and I noticed her eyes were this incredible shade of green, like sea glass. "I'm starting over at 51. Which apparently makes me either very brave or very foolish, depending on who you ask." 51, I repeated, and before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "If you were 35, I'd propose." The moment the joke left my mouth, I felt my face flush red. It was exactly the kind of awkward, inappropriate comment that made me want to disappear into the poetry section and never emerge. But instead of looking offended or uncomfortable, Sophia threw back her head and laughed. That same rich, genuine laugh that had caught my attention when she'd first walked in. "I'm 51, she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Is that a deal-breaker?" Time seemed to slow down. The rain kept pattering against the windows, the jazz kept playing softly in the background, but everything else in the world had suddenly become very quiet. This wasn't happening. Women like Sophia, confident, beautiful, clearly successful, didn't flirt with awkward bookstore owners who made inappropriate jokes about marriage proposals. But she was looking at me with genuine interest, not the polite smile most customers gave when they were ready to move on to their actual book shopping. She was waiting for an answer to what had started as my stupid joke, but now felt like the most important question I'd ever been asked. "No," I heard myself say, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Actually, That makes it more interesting. The smile that spread across her face was worth every awkward moment that had led to this one. Good, she said simply. Then maybe you can help me find that book about second chances. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. For the next hour, I helped Sophia find not just one book about second chances, but 3. We started with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because she wanted something with glamour and complexity, moved on to Circe for its themes of transformation and self-discovery, and ended with Station 11 because she mentioned loving. Stories about how people rebuild after everything falls apart. But the books were really just an excuse to keep talking. Learned that she'd been a marketing executive at a tech company in Seattle for 15 years, climbing the corporate ladder with ruthless efficiency until she'd woken up one morning and realized she was successful at something that made her miserable. I was good at convincing people they needed things they didn't actually want, she told me while I rang up her purchases. Turns out I was also convincing myself I wanted things I didn't actually need. Like what? I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew the answer. The corner office. The salary that required working 70 hours a week. The husband who looked perfect on paper but treated our marriage like another item on his business agenda. She paused, studying my face. I sound bitter, don't I? You sound honest, I replied. There's a difference. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. No kids, thankfully. Just assets to divide and a life to rebuild from scratch. She'd taken her settlement money and decided to do something completely different. Freelance consulting for small businesses that actually cared about their communities. Portland had seemed like the right place for that kind of work. Plus, she'd always loved the city during her business trips. And now I'm flirting with a bookstore owner who's probably young enough to be... She paused, calculating. Well, not my son, but definitely my much younger brother. 23 years, I said without thinking. I did the math. She raised an eyebrow. Fast math skills. Impressive. Most guys your age would have pretended not to care about the age difference. Most guys my age haven't spent the last 4 years hiding in a bookstore because they're too scared to take real risks. The honesty surprised me. I wasn't usually the type to reveal my insecurities to customers, especially beautiful ones who just admitted to flirting with me. And what would qualify as a real risk? Sophia asked, leaning against the counter in a way that made our conversation feel more intimate despite being surrounded by thousands of books. This, I said simply. Talking to you like you're not just another customer. Admitting that I noticed you the moment you walked in. Not pretending that I'm too cool to care that you're considering buying 3 books just to keep our conversation going. She laughed, but it was different this time. Softer, more surprised. You're very direct for someone who claims to be scared of taking risks. Only with you, apparently. I handed her the bag with her books. I'm usually much more pathetic. I find that hard to believe. She shouldered her purse but made no move toward the door. So what happens now? Do I become one of those customers who comes in every week pretending to need new books when I really just want to talk to the attractive bookstore owner? My heart did something acrobatic in my chest. That depends. Are you planning to move back to Seattle anytime soon? Not a chance. I just signed a lease on a house in Laurelhurst. 2 bedrooms, a garden I have no idea how to maintain, and neighbors who actually wave when they see you in the yard. She paused, seeming to consider something. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Actual coffee, not just the excuse to browse books? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. Every rational part of my brain was screaming warnings. She was older, more experienced, recently divorced, probably just being friendly to the helpful bookstore guy. But there was something in her expression, a vulnerability beneath the confidence. That made me think maybe this was real? Yes, I said before I could talk myself out of it. I would like that very much. Good. She pulled out her phone. What's your number? As I recited the digits, I caught sight of Austin through the window. He was standing in the doorway of his record shop, coffee mug in hand, watching our interaction with the kind of fascination usually reserved for particularly dramatic reality TV shows. When he saw me looking, he gave me an exaggerated thumbs up that was visible through 2 layers of glass. Saturday afternoon, Sophia suggested. There's a place called Stumptown that someone recommended. Perfect, I managed, still not quite believing this was happening. 2 o'clock? It's a date. She headed toward the door, then turned back. Byron, for what it's worth, I think 23 years might be exactly the right amount of difference. Old enough to be interesting, young enough to still surprise me. And then she was gone, leaving me standing behind my counter with a stupid grin on my face and the distinct feeling that my carefully ordered life was about to become much more complicated. The moment Sophia's burgundy coat disappeared around the corner, Austin materialized in my doorway like he'd been waiting for his cue. "Dude," he said, setting his coffee mug on my counter with the reverence usually reserved for placing flowers on a grave. "What the hell just happened?" "I think I have a date," I replied, still staring at the door. "With the silver-haired goddess? Who just bought half your literary fiction section?" Austin's eyes were wide. "Byron, my friend, you've either just won the lottery or signed up for the most educational heartbreak of your life." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Julie. "Emergency meeting, Bridgeport Brewing, 7 p.m. Bradley's already been notified. Do not make excuses." Apparently, Austin's surveillance hadn't been the only one. By 7 o'clock, I was sitting in a corner booth at Bridgeport with my 3-person relationship advisory board staring at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus. Julie had already ordered a pitcher of their IPA and was taking notes on a napkin like she was preparing for a board meeting. "Start from the beginning," she commanded, "and don't leave out any details." I told them everything. The book request, the conversation about second chances, the proposal joke that had somehow turned into actual flirting, the coffee date that was now less than 48 hours away. Bradley listened with the intensity of someone trying to solve a mathematical proof, while Austin provided a running commentary that ranged from admiring to concerned. 23 years, Julie said when I finished, tapping her pen against the table. "That's not just an age gap, Byron. That's a different generation. She was graduating college when you were learning to tie your shoes." "Thanks for the perspective," I said dryly. "Really helpful." "No. But seriously," Bradley interjected, pulling out his phone. "I've been thinking about this since Austin texted us. The life experience differential here is massive. She's been married, divorced, had a career, started over. You've been, what? Running a bookstore and avoiding commitment?" "I haven't been avoiding commitment," I protested. "I've been building a business." Austin snorted. "Right. And I've been building a vinyl empire instead of hiding from my fear of intimacy." Julie leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Look, I'm not saying don't go for it. I'm saying go into this with your eyes open. Women like that, successful, confident, recently divorced, they know what they want. The question is whether you're ready to be what someone like that wants." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means she's not going to be impressed by your extensive knowledge of indie bookstore management," Bradley said bluntly. "She's probably dated CEOs and lawyers and men who own actual houses instead of renting studio apartments." The words hit harder than they should have, probably because they echoed my own insecurities. What did I have to offer someone like Sophia? My greatest achievement was keeping a small bookstore profitable in an era when most independent stores were closing. I lived in a 400-square-foot apartment and considered it a big night out when I spent more than $20 on dinner. "Okay, new strategy," Julie announced, apparently sensing my spiraling thoughts. "Instead of focusing on what you don't have, let's talk about what you do have." You made her laugh. You had a genuine conversation that lasted over an hour. She asked you out, not the other way around. That means something. Plus, Austin added, she specifically said the age difference made it more interesting. That's not something you say if you're looking for a safe, predictable relationship. Maybe she's tired of dating men her own age who have their whole lives figured out. Bradley was scrolling through his phone. I looked her up on LinkedIn. Sophia Winters, former VP of Marketing at CloudSync Solutions. She managed a team of 30 people and oversaw campaigns with budgets bigger than your store's annual revenue. He looked up. She's also gorgeous, based on her professional photos. That's not helping, I said. Actually, it is, Julie corrected. Because it means she could date anyone, CEOs, doctors, other executives. But she's choosing to get coffee. With you. The question is why? We spent the next hour dissecting every moment of my interaction with Sophia, analyzing her word choices like we were interpreting ancient texts. Bradley created a detailed timeline of our conversation on his phone, noting what he called positive engagement indicators. Austin shared increasingly inappropriate theories about older women dating younger men. Julie drafted what she called a strategic dating plan that included conversation topics, wardrobe suggestions, and backup activities in case coffee led to a longer date. By the time we left the brewery, I was simultaneously more confident and more terrified than when I'd arrived. My friends meant well, but their analysis had made me hyper-aware of everything that could go wrong. What if Sophia realized during coffee that I was too young, too inexperienced, too small-scale for whatever she was looking for? But as I walked home through the quiet Portland streets, I kept coming back to the moment when she'd turned to leave the store. The way she'd looked back at me, like she was memorizing something important. 23 years might be exactly the right amount of difference, she'd said. Maybe Julie was right. Maybe Sophia was tired of predictable. Maybe she wanted someone who would surprise her, challenge her assumptions, make her laugh in a bookstore on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Or maybe I was about to discover just how far out of my league I really was. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that makes Portland look like a postcard. I'd changed clothes 3 times, settled on dark jeans and a navy sweater that Julie had declared approachable but not trying too hard, and arrived at Stumptown Coffee 15 minutes early because I was apparently incapable of being fashionably late when my stomach was doing Olympic gymnastics. Sophia walked in at exactly 2 o'clock, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and jeans that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked effortlessly elegant in a way that made me acutely aware of my own carefully calculated casualness. "You look nervous," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Terrified," I admitted. "But in a good way." She laughed, and some of the tension in my shoulders released. "Good. I was worried you might be one of those guys who pretends everything's easy." The conversation flowed like we'd been having coffee dates for years. She told me about her new house, how she'd spent the morning trying to figure out what to do with a garden that the previous owner had clearly loved but she knew nothing about. I told her about the bookstore, about the regular customers who'd become like family, about the author reading series I'd started that had become unexpectedly popular. "You're different than I expected," she said after we'd been talking for over an hour. "Different how?" "More substantial. When you made that joke about proposing, I thought you might be one of those charming but shallow guys who says whatever he thinks women want to hear. But you actually listen. You ask follow-up questions. You remember details from stories I told you 3 minutes ago." I felt a flush of pride, followed immediately by panic. "Is that good or bad?" "It's dangerous," she said with a smile that made my pulse quicken, "because it makes me want to keep talking to you." We ended up walking through Laurelhurst Park after coffee, the conversation shifting to more personal territory. She told me about her marriage, how it had started with genuine love, but gradually became a partnership focused more on achieving the right lifestyle than actually enjoying life together. I told her about my relationship history, the string of dates that had gone nowhere, and the growing sense that maybe I was fundamentally unsuited for serious relationships. Or maybe, she suggested, as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond, you just hadn't met anyone worth being serious about. The comment hung between us, loaded with possibility and terrifying implications. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. "Sorry," I said, glancing at the screen. "It's my ex-girlfriend. We don't usually. I should probably." The message was from Sarah, someone I dated briefly 2 years ago in what could generously be called a relationship, but was more accurately described as 6 months of incompatible expectations and mismatched communication styles. We'd ended things amicably enough, but we hadn't spoken since. "Emergency," the text read. "Need to talk. Can you meet me tonight?" Sophia noticed my expression change. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just unexpected," I said, trying to sound casual while my mind raced through possibilities. Sarah was dramatic, but not given to manufactured emergencies. If she was reaching out after 2 years of silence, something was genuinely wrong. "You should go," Sophia said gently. "If someone needs you, you should be there." Her understanding made me feel both grateful and guilty. Here I was, on what was possibly the best date of my life, and I was already getting pulled away by complications from my past. "This isn't how I wanted this afternoon to end," I said. It doesn't have to end. Rain check on dinner? She touched my arm lightly. Byron, one of the things I like about you is that you seem like the kind of person who shows up when people need you. Don't apologize for that. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a dive bar in southeast Portland, listening to Sarah explain that she was pregnant, probably by her current boyfriend who had disappeared the moment she'd told him, and that she needed someone to talk to who wouldn't judge her for making yet another questionable life choice. I know this is weird, she said, nursing a club soda while I worked on my second beer. Calling you. But you were always the most stable person I dated, and I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't try to fix everything or tell me what to do. I spent the next 2 hours listening to Sarah work through her options, offering the kind of practical advice I was apparently good at giving, but terrible at taking myself. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight, and I had 7 missed texts from my friends asking how the date had gone. But the message that made my heart skip was from Sophia. Hope everything worked out okay. Looking forward to that rain check. Sweet dreams. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something that could change everything. Sophia was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. More confident, more experienced, more willing to be direct about what she wanted. The age difference that had seemed like an interesting detail in the bookstore was beginning to feel more significant in the context of actual dating. She had a house, a career transition that was really a reinvention, a life history that included corporate success and marital failure. I had a bookstore, a studio apartment, and an ex-girlfriend who still called me when her life fell apart because I was stable. Maybe Bradley had been right. Maybe the life experience differential was too massive to bridge. Or maybe, as Sophia had suggested, I just hadn't met anyone worth being serious about until now. The second date happened 3 days later, and it was everything the first one had promised to be. Sophia suggested we meet at Powell's Books, which felt like home field advantage until I realized she knew more about literature than most of my regular customers. We spent 2 hours wandering the stacks, debating the merits of different authors, and I found myself completely forgetting about our age difference until we ran into someone from my past who made it impossible to ignore. Byron? Byron Fletcher? I turned to see Madeline Harper, my college girlfriend's older sister, approaching with the kind of smile that suggested this encounter was going to be more complicated than a simple hello. Madeline had always been intimidating. She was currently a successful lawyer in Portland, someone who moved in social circles that didn't typically overlap with independent bookstore owners. Madeline, hey, I said, acutely aware that Sophia was watching this interaction with curious interest. This is Sophia Winters. Sophia, this is Madeline Harper. The two women shook hands, and I could practically see them sizing each other up. Madeline's gaze lingered on Sophia's face, clearly trying to place her age, while Sophia maintained the kind of polite smile that revealed nothing. How do you two know each other? Madeline asked, her tone suggesting she already suspected the answer and wasn't entirely pleased with it. We met at Byron's bookstore, Sophia replied smoothly. He has excellent taste in recommendations. I'm sure he does. Madeline's smile didn't reach her eyes. Byron, you haven't changed a bit. Still hiding out in bookstores, I see. The comment hit exactly where it was intended to. In front of Sophia, successful, accomplished, reinventing her life at 51, I suddenly felt like exactly what Madeline had implied. A guy who'd been standing still while everyone else moved forward. Actually, Sophia interjected, I think there's something admirable about building something meaningful instead of just chasing the next promotion. Not everyone needs to measure success by traditional metrics. Madeline raised an eyebrow. That's a very mature perspective. How long have you two been together? We're just getting to know each other, I said quickly, but the damage was done. The word mature hung in the air between us, loaded with implications about age and experience that made my cheeks burn. After Madeline left, the afternoon felt different. Our conversation was still engaging, but I could sense Sophia evaluating me in a new way, perhaps seeing me through Madeline's eyes, as someone who'd chosen comfort over ambition, safety over growth. She seemed nice, Sophia said as we walked back to our cars. She thinks I'm wasting my potential, I admitted. Always has. And what do you think? The question caught me off guard because I'd never really considered it seriously. Was I wasting my potential? I loved the bookstore. loved being part of Portland's literary community. But compared to Sophia's corporate achievements or Madeline's legal career, my life suddenly seemed very small. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe she's right. Sophia stopped walking and turned to face me. Byron, do you want to know what I find attractive about you? I nodded, not trusting my voice. You're not trying to be someone else. You're not performing success or pretending to have life figured out. You're just present. Do you have any idea how rare that is? But even as she said it, I could see something shifting in her expression, a flicker of doubt that made my stomach clench with recognition. The same doubt I was feeling about whether someone like me was enough for someone like her. The third date never happened. Sophia texted me the night after our Powell's encounter with a message that felt like a polite punch to the gut. Hey, I think we should talk. Can you come over tomorrow evening? I knew what "we should talk" meant. I'd heard it before, though never from someone who mattered this much. But I went anyway, because the alternative was spending the rest of my life wondering what she would have said. Sophia's house in Laurelhurst was exactly what I'd expected. Tasteful, expensive, the kind of place that whispered financial security and good decision-making. She answered the door in jeans and a soft gray sweater, looking beautiful and sad in a way that made my chest tight. "Come in," she said. I made coffee. We sat in her living room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything about the space screamed adult accomplishment, and I felt like a kid playing dress-up in my carefully chosen outfit. "Byron," she began, and I knew from her tone that whatever came next was going to hurt. Yesterday made me realize something I've been trying to ignore. "The age thing," I said flatly. "Not the age thing, the life stage thing." She set down her coffee cup and looked at me directly. "When I was your age, I was climbing corporate ladders and making terrible decisions about men and thinking I had everything figured out. I'm 51 now, and I'm finally at a place where I know what I want and what I don't want. And you don't want me. I want you," she said, and the sincerity in her voice made it worse somehow. "That's the problem. I want you so much that I'm willing to ignore the fact that we're in completely different places in our lives." She explained it with the kind of clarity that came from years of making difficult business decisions. I was 28 and still figuring out who I wanted to be. She was 51 and finally becoming who she'd always been. I was running a bookstore and living in a studio apartment because it felt safe. She was reinventing her entire life because safety had nearly killed her spirit. "I don't want to be the older woman who holds you back from growing," she said. "And I don't want to be the one who gets hurt when you realize there's a whole world of experiences you haven't had yet." "What if I don't want those experiences?" I asked. "What if I want this?" "You don't know what you want yet." "That's not an insult, Byron. It's just true. When I was 28, I thought I wanted a corner office and a husband who looked good on holiday cards. It took me 20 years to figure out I was wrong. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was making assumptions about me that weren't true. But sitting in her perfectly appointed living room, looking at the evidence of her accomplished life, I couldn't find the words. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just a guy hiding in a bookstore, afraid to take real risks or make big changes. "So that's it?" I asked. "I think it has to be," she said softly. "For both our sakes." I left her house feeling like I'd been gutted. Not just because she'd ended things, but because she'd held up a mirror that showed me exactly how small my life really was. For 2 weeks after Sophia ended things, I went through the motions of running the bookstore while feeling like I was underwater. Julie, Austin, and Bradley took turns checking on me with the persistence of concerned parents. But I wasn't ready to talk about what had happened. I needed to figure some things out first. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Chen, one of my regular customers, came in looking for a book about starting over after retirement. She was 73, recently widowed, and considering moving to a smaller apartment. "I feel like I'm too old to start anything new," she confided, while I helped her find memoirs about late-life reinvention. "Everyone expects me to just settle into being a grandmother and playing bridge." "What do you want to do?" I asked. "Travel, learn photography, maybe take a cooking class." She laughed self-consciously. "Foolish for someone my age, right?" "Mrs. Chen," I said, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. The only foolish thing would be not doing those things because of what other people expect. As I spoke, I realized I was giving advice I needed to hear myself. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been accepting Sophia's narrative about our relationship. That I was too young, too inexperienced, too stuck in my safe little life to know what I really wanted. But what if she was wrong? What if the problem wasn't that I didn't know what I wanted, but that I'd been too afraid to fight for it? That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I closed the store early and drove to Sophia's house. She answered the door looking surprised and slightly wary. "Byron, what are you doing here?" "I came to tell you that you're wrong," I said. "About me, about us, about what I want." She stepped aside to let me in, but her expression remained guarded. "Byron, no, let me talk first." I took a deep breath. "You said I don't know what I want because I'm 28 and haven't experienced enough of life yet. But here's what I know. I know that I've never had a conversation with anyone that made me lose track of time the way our conversations do. I know that I've never met anyone who challenged me to think differently about my own life. I know that when you walked into my bookstore, something changed in me that I don't want to change back." I paused, gathering courage for what came next. "You're right that we're in different life stages. But maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's exactly what makes this work. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're already complete. And I'm not looking for someone to figure out my life for me. I want someone who inspires me to figure it out myself." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was seeing me for the first time. "You said you don't want to hold me back from growing," I continued. "But what if being with you is exactly what would help me grow? What if the reason I've been standing still isn't because I'm afraid of change, but because I was waiting for the right reason to change? And I'm that reason?" she asked softly. "We are that reason. Together." For the first time since I'd known her, Sophia looked uncertain. "Byron, what if you're wrong? What if in 5 years you realize you want something completely different? Then, we'll figure it out together," I said. "Just like you figured out at 51 that you wanted something different than what you had at 45. People change, Sophia. That's not a bug. It's a feature." Sophia kissed me that night, but it wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of the real work. Over the next 3 months, we had to figure out what it actually meant to build a relationship across such different life experiences. It wasn't always easy. The first real test came when Sophia was offered a consulting contract with a tech startup in San Francisco, a 6-month project that would require her to travel back and forth between Portland and the Bay Area. The old Byron would have probably encouraged her to take it while quietly assuming it meant the end of us. But I'd learned something important about fighting for what I wanted. "Take the job," I told her over dinner at her kitchen table. "But let's figure out how to make it work. For us, you'd be okay with me being gone half the time? I'd be okay with you doing work that excites you," I corrected. "That's what I want for you. The question is whether you want to figure out the logistics together." She took the job, and we figured it out. When she was in San Francisco, we had long phone conversations that reminded me why I'd fallen for her in the first place. When she was in Portland, we made the most of our time together. I started visiting her in the Bay Area on weekends, discovering that I actually enjoyed traveling when I had a reason to. But the bigger test came when Julie announced she was getting married and asked me to be in her wedding party. The bachelor party was a weekend in Las Vegas, exactly the kind of experience Sophia had worried I was missing out on. "Go," she said when I told her about it. "Have fun. Figure out if there's some part of single guy life you're not ready to give up." Vegas with Bradley, Austin, and a group of Julie's other friends was exactly as ridiculous as I'd expected. There were clubs and gambling and conversations about women that made me realize how much I'd changed. But the moment that mattered most came on the second night, when one of Julie's friends, a guy named Derek who'd been divorced twice, cornered me at the hotel bar. "Dude, you're dating someone 23 years older than you? That's either the best midlife crisis preparation ever or the worst mistake you'll make." He laughed like he'd said something clever. "I mean, what happens when she hits 60 and you're still in your 30s? For a split second, I felt the old insecurity creep in. But then I thought about Sophia, her laugh when I made her coffee, in the morning. The way she challenged me to think bigger about my life. How she'd encouraged me to take the Vegas trip even though she was worried about what I might discover. What happens, I said, is that I'll be lucky enough to be with someone who gets more interesting every year instead of someone who peaked in college. Derek looked confused, but Austin, who'd been listening nearby, grinned and bought me another drink. I called Sophia that night from my hotel room. I miss you, I told her. How's Vegas treating you? It's making me realize that everything I want is in Portland. Byron, she said softly, I think I'm falling in love with you. Good, I replied, because I'm already there. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my bookstore on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The same kind of day when Sophia first walked in and changed everything. But now she's here with me, reading in the corner chair she's claimed as her own, occasionally looking up to catch my eye and smile. The bookstore has changed too. With Sophia's business expertise, we've expanded our author reading series and started hosting workshops for aspiring writers. I'm planning to open a small cafe in the space next door. Something I never would have had the courage to attempt before I met someone who taught me that growth and safety weren't mutually exclusive. Still think you made the right choice? I ask her as I close up for the evening. About the bookstore cafe or about the guy who joked about marrying me? She replies, not looking up from her book. Both. She closes the book and looks at me with that same expression she had the first day we met. Like she's seeing something that surprises and delights her. Byron, do you know what I've learned about second chances? What's that? They're not about getting what you missed the first time. They're about discovering something you never knew you wanted. We've talked about the future, about what it means to build a life together when we're starting from such different places. We don't have all the answers, but we've learned that the questions themselves are part of the adventure. Age is just a number, but experience is everything. Not the experience that teaches you to be cautious, but the experience that teaches you to be brave enough to want something real, something unexpected, something that challenges you to become more than you thought possible. Sometimes the best love stories start with a joke and a woman brave enough to laugh at it. Sometimes 23 years isn't a gap to be bridged. It's just the perfect amount of space for two people to grow into something beautiful together. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the punchline turns out to be the beginning of the best story you'll ever tell. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.